Hi everyone, thank you for joining me on this chapter 6 voiceover recording. So this is going to be start of a bundle of 3 chapters that go together. First, in this chapter 6, we will look at the general concept of what metabolism and energy are. And then once we have this basic concept of energy clear, we will apply it. And by that, I mean that chapters 8 and 7 focus on how we make and use energy. So chapter 8 looks at photosynthesis, where chemical energy is made. And chapter 7 looks at the use of this chemical energy in a process of cellular respiration. But before we get too far, let's just start with the basics. So earlier on this semester, we have learned a lot about how all life is based on chemistry. And the same is true for all the reactions that take place within a cell. The concept of chemical energy as well. So often we see that some other textbooks may call this chapter as dynamic cell or simply energy. But no matter what name we give to it, it's all about the same thing. So let's take a step back and consider an actual example of what we will be talking about in this session. And by this stage of the class, you know that I like to use stories to explain things. So let's do just that. So before I moved to the US, I had never seen a hummingbird before. And this is simply because I had not ever lived somewhere where they had these. So when I saw one, I was like, that looks like a bird, but flies like an insect, with these wings flapping like crazy all the time. And that is exactly what the hummingbirds do. They must be moving their wings all the time, just to stay still in one place. Like what we see in this picture, where a hummingbird is feeding, and we can see that its wings are moving so fast that the camera even has a hard time catching that. And this constant flying, that requires, of course, energy. So with the hummingbirds constantly flying, they would go through a huge amount of energy, right? So I guess that the question becomes then that, okay, that hummingbirds are these small animals, and to meet their energy needs that they require and their muscles require to allow them to fly constantly, well, because they are so small, they cannot have huge reservoirs of energy stored anywhere. So what do the hummingbirds do instead? Well, I am sure that you all know. I didn't know this when I first met these creatures, but they seem to be constantly feeding. So hummingbirds need almost constant supply of food and nutrients from that food. And they need it in order to sustain this constant flying, which requires constant energy. So whether the food is from flowers or sugar water from a hummingbird feeder, they tend to spend most of their day consuming food. And then, through a complex pathway of biochemical reactions, these nutrients are converted into chemical energy, which we typically call ATP. And this can be transported within the body, stored, and used as needed. And it is the biochemical pathways that we use to convert nutrients into energy, and pathways that are used to convert this energy into movement, in this case the muscles, that we will be looking at in these chapters. So once again, we find ourselves noticing that everything in life is based on chemistry. So if you were wondering, that is the reason why we needed to start our course with a basic understanding of the chemistry. And here I have this beautiful painting of one of the first female chemists, Anna Kansky, painted by Henrika Santel from 1932 to remind us about that. Well, now to the story part, and this is not in the exam, obviously. So what have I learned about hummingbirds? Well, obviously I got super excited about seeing these animals. After all, these being new to me. So I was like, yeah, let's hook up lots and lots of hummingbird feeders on a porch of a place where I was living. Guess what else likes sugar water? So after getting a visit from a brown bear chub that came to drink the sugar water, I recognized that there is a place and there is a time for hummingbird feeders. And maybe that place is not the brown bear country in the Rockies. Okay, let's move on and let's consider what the energy is really. So most textbooks define energy as an ability to do work. And you might have heard your high school teachers or textbooks using that kind of a definition of the energy. And I'm not saying that it is a bad definition. It's just not exactly correct. Because if you think about it, we do still have energy, even if it is not available for us to use at that very moment. So this earlier definition tends to overlook that point and slightly oversimplifies the matter. And wouldn't that make a very good homework question? Okay, next we should talk a little bit more about the energy. And I want to start by looking at where does the energy come from. So ultimately, all of the energy on this earth is originated from the sun. If you think about it, this energy then passes throughout the system from one level to another. So important thing here to note is that the energy never randomly just appears at any of these further stages. It must come from somewhere. And similarly, energy just never disappears somewhere. If we lose energy, we must be able to point out where we lose this in these various further stages. And of course, as we already earlier on alluded to it, energy can absolutely change its form as it passes through this system. Let's have a look at that. So here we have solar energy over here, and it gets converted into chemical energy by plants. So this is through photosynthesis, where plants make sugars. And sugars are these chemical molecules that store energy. And then we have, of course, other animals like us humans. We cannot do photosynthesis. So we cannot convert the solar energy into something useful to power our own bodily processes. What we do instead is that we use cellular metabolism to convert chemical energy, so sugars, into energy that we can use on a cellular level, and this would be ATP. And we will talk more about ATP in a little bit, but for now, you can consider it as something that is the format of energy in a cell. So I call it often the cellular energy currency. And then this ATP can be converted for example, in our example of the hummingbird, into mechanical energy by our muscles. But here we see again that this energy is converted from one form to another. So as it's here from ATP to movement, there is always some of it being lost in the conversion processes. So as you see in these diagrams, it is these red arrows that I want you to focus on. You will see that the energy simply passes through the system, right? The light blue arrows that you see in this figure is something else. It is about the recycling of nutrients. Let's have a look at that. So here we see what we just discussed about the energy on the left-hand side as a text. And here we see what the blue arrows stand for. And this is on the right-hand side of the text provided. So producers are responsible for taking the solar energy and inorganic molecules and converting them into food. So they produce food. Of course, we humans, for example, we cannot do this. So we have to rely on these producers. So humans and many other animals are consumers. We consume the producers or other consumers to get the food that we need. So we eat others for this purpose. And then we have decomposers, which are responsible for releasing inorganic molecules back to the soil so that they can be reused. So they are responsible for breaking down dead organic material and waste products. So what I guess is the big message that I want you to get and notice here is that while the nutrients get recycled time and time again, energy instead does simply flow through the system. And with each conversion from one form to another, we lose some of the energy. And that energy is typically lost as heat, as you might recall. So again, I think that this compare and contrast of nutrients versus energy would make a very good question, wouldn't it? Okay, next we should talk a little bit about this term here, metabolism. So what is metabolism? So here is the definition that I'm offering for you. Metabolism refers to all chemical reactions that we have in a living organism. And the function of these is to support the maintenance of life. So this can be really any chemical reaction that we have. And what you see here is two chemical formulas. And these are going to be very important formulas for us as we continue to the next two chapters. So on the first one, we see that we have solar energy and carbon dioxide and water. So all of these are what our plants need. Sunlight, carbon dioxide from the air, and water through the root system. And what do plants do then? Well, they remember from what we just saw, they make sugars. So here I have a formula for glucose molecule, which is one of the most simple ones to use here. So commonly used one. And as a byproduct of this process, plants also make oxygen, which just happens to be super useful for us humans. So now that we have looked at this formula, we have actually already taken a head start of peeking into what we will be talking about in Chapter 8. And this is, of course, photosynthesis. So we have just reviewed the concept of photosynthesis. Now, let's have a look at the second formula. Here we see a lot of familiar things from the earlier, right? We see the same sugar, so in this place, glucose molecule, and also oxygen. So essentially, it is the very same stuff as we had as the products of the previous reaction. And now this reaction results in making carbon dioxide and water, and most importantly, ATP. And this ATP is going to be the energy currency that we use in cellular metabolism. So it is what drives as an energy all chemical reactions within this cell, where the energy is needed to trigger these reactions. And this reaction that we just looked at, it is known as cellular respiration. So this is what happens in a cell level to convert these sugars into a format that is usable for the cell's reactions. If we consider these two reactions, what we see is basically that they have almost opposite from each other. And just in case you were wondering, what are these numbers that I have in front of the components that I have here? They are there just because I wanted the balance of the equation. So they just show how many of each of these molecules we need to make this reaction. And the final thing that I wanted to share with you is to expand a little more about this diagram that you have been seeing on the right-hand side of this slide. So it is basically just a part of a larger figure that summarizes the metabolic processes within the cell. But I would never ask you to remember this. As long as we stick at this stage to the formulas that we saw here, the photosynthesis and the cellular respiration, we are all good. And there is going to be one more topic that I want to discuss in this video. Let's look at the question that, what are metabolic pathways? Well, these are basically just connected chemical reactions that lead into something. So to use the previous diagram again, like here we see number of these chemical reactions that are connected to each other, forming a metabolic pathway that we see here highlighted. Okay, let's get back to where we were. So we can also see here that there are two things that these pathways can do. Let's discuss these in a little bit more detail. And we will start with the anabolic reactions. So what anabolic reactions do is that they are responsible for building new larger molecules. And this process takes effort, so energy to make this happen. So if we look at the picture here, we will see that anabolic reaction requires that we are combining simple compounds to build a more complex substance. And where we see this happening would be, for example, in the processes that are related to growth and repairing damage in the body. What I really want you to notice here is that putting something together requires energy. It requires extra effort to get these small compounds to join together to form this larger molecule. So in this finalized large molecule, there is energy stored within these bonds that are between the smaller parts. After all, remember that the energy does not just appear or disappear somewhere. So in this case, the energy gets stored into the bonds that are formed. And let's look at the reverse of this process. In catabolic reactions instead, we are breaking something down, and when we are doing so, we are releasing energy. So in this diagram, we can see that catabolism refers to the breakdown of larger substances into simpler compounds. And we can see examples of this, for example, in the digestion of food and oxidation of nutrient molecules for energy. The big thing here that I want you to note is that energy that was stored within the bonds of this large molecule, well, this energy is now released. And we break down the large molecule into smaller components. And this is going to be an important concept for us to keep in mind as we cover more material of this chapter in the next lecture video. But for now, this is going to be where I will wrap up this video. I know that there was a lot of concepts here, but when you approach them by keeping them simple, it is totally feasible to wrap your head around these. So I thank you for joining me, and I will see you in the next video.